Hi and sorry. My English is not perfect, but the story is still awesome. Portugal year 1361. The court is gathered in the throne room. Royal banners hang heavy from the walls. The torches barely warm the thick, stagnant air. An upon coffin stands before the knoll, and inside a woman. A crown rests upon her skull. A royal gown drapes over her bones, and her skeletal hands, adorned with queenly rings, lie in wait. One by one, the nobles approach. The archbishop trembles, the chancellor weeps, but they all obey. They bow, kiss her decaying hand, and call her Your Majesty, because this woman is dead, and yet she reigns. Her name was Inés de Castro, and her story begins where most others end, in the grave. How did she get there? To understand it, we must unearth a tale where love was a crime, passion a death sentence, and the throne a curse. If you're ready to discover how the corpse of a woman was crowned queen after death and revered by a nation, listen closely, because what you're about to hear is not fairy tale. Coimbra 20 years earlier. The palace gardens bloom as always, but tragedy has already taken root unseen. Prince Pedro, the heir to the throne, should never have looked at her. She was merely a lady in waiting, Galician foreign, with no title, no crown, but her hair was like aged gold, her eyes pale and melancholy, and her voice soft, tinged with an accent that sounded like music to Pedro. Her name was Inés, and without knowing it, she changed the fate of a kingdom. What began as a shy glance became an all consuming fire. The prince loved her without measure, without law, without reason, and she did not flee. They lived together after Pedro's lawful wife death. They had children. They built a secret world within the castle walls. But love is not forgiven when it interferes with the gain of power. King Alfonso IV, Pedro's father, hated her. He claimed Inés was an infiltrator, that her brothers manipulated the prince, that her beauty masked a conspiracy. So he ordered her death. On a cold January day, while Pedro was away, Inés walked in the gardens with her children. The assassins arrived under royal command. She fell to her knees. She begged. She showed them her small children. She promised to live, but there was no mercy. They beheaded her by the fountain. Her blood stained the water. The screams of her children lasted longer than her death. When Pedro returned, he did not bury her body. He buried his soul. He kept silent. But in his chest, something stronger than grief was growing, vengeance. 2 years later, his father died. Pedro was crowned king, and his first act was to hunt down the assassins. He captured them, dragged them to the town square, and in front of the people tore out their hearts, one through the chest, the other through the back. For one had killed face to face, and the other through betrayal. But that wasn't the darkest part. Pedro ordered Inés' body to be examined. Fleshless, breathless. They dressed her as a queen, placed a crown on her skull, and sat her on the throne. Dead, but more powerful than ever. Then the new king declared before the entire court, but before your queen. Historians debated for centuries whether Pedro was mad or whether he simply loved too deeply, but no one forgot his decree. Inés de Castro was my lawful wife, and now she is Queen of Portugal. He signed it in front of judges, bishops, nobles, and traders. He swore it with his hand on the altar, his face wet with tears and fury. And so she became queen. Dead, but queen. Heralds rode across the kingdom to proclaim it. The bells rang as if for a royal wedding, but no one saw her walk to the altar, because the queen lay inside a coffin, sealed with golden nails. Pedro ordered her coffin opened. He had it brought to the monastery grave hall. The monks prayed without looking. Servants fainted. The strength was unbearable. The stint was unbearable. A mix of stale perfume, rotting flowers, and decomposing flesh. She was dressed in a new royal gown. She was dressed in a new royal gown. A white veil was placed over her face, and in her skeletal hands a dried rose, crushed by the wave of time. They say that if you got too close to the corpse, you felt something watching you from the hollow eye sockets. The date of her posthumous coronation was the darkest in Portugal royal history. A storm howled outside as if the heavens opposed it, but inside the ceremony continued. The nobles, forced by dirty line up, one by one, pale-faced and trembling. They kissed the decaying head of Inés. Some vomited afterward, others whispered prayers into her ear. Another swore he saw her finger twitch. Pedro did not cry. He smiled, because at last the world acknowledged what he had always known. She was his queen, and now no one could ever take her from him again. After the ceremony, Inés was buried at the monastery of Alcobaca, not in just any tomb, but in a white marble sarcophagus carved with angels, lions, and a sense of the Last Judgment. Her remains were laid directly opposite Pedro's future tomb, so that when the end of the world came and the stones were broken open, they would rise at the same time, see each other, and hold hands. Pedro never remarried. He never loved again. He ruled with an iron fist, wrapped in mourning and obsession. He built canals, protected peasants, administered justice, but in his castle he kept locks of Inés' hair, letters, portraits, and silence. They say he talked to himself at night, that he denied in front of an empty chair, that one day a servant found him asleep atop her tomb, his lips pressed to the stone. Pedro first died in 1967 at the age of 47. Some say it was fever, others that he simply let himself die. On his deathbed, he asked to be dressed in white, not as a king, but as a husband. Inés bore him 4 children, 3 sons and a daughter. 2 of them died young, but the youngest, Fernando, survived. When Pedro died, Fernando first ascended to the throne, son of a dead queen, of a murdered mother, But the weight of the past crushed him. He was a weak, unstable king, haunted by conspiracies, pressure by foreign alliances. He died without a male heir, and with his death, the House of Burgundy came to an end. Portugal plunged into a succession crisis, all because years earlier someone decided to kill Inés. The people never forgot the corpse queen. They say shepherds walking near to the monastery of Alcobaca would see a white woman wandering among the grave at dawn, that monks heard footsteps at night and smelled the accent of white-haired ladies, that if you approached her tombs too closely, you'd feel a chill not born of marble. Peasants still left dried flowers on her grave, as if they knew that deep down. Inés had never truly rested. Today her tomb still stands, facing Pedro's, waiting for Judgment Day, waiting for her moment. Inés de Castro was far more than a dead queen. She was a warning, a symbol, a curse. Because in her story, we learn that love can be stronger than flesh, crueler than war, and more eternal than power. If this story gave you chills, subscribe to this channel, hit the bell, and leave a like. Thank you for staying with me until the end. And so sorry about my bad English, but it's interesting story. And remember, not all royalty flows with warm blood. Some rule with cold blood from the grave. Always walk toward the light, even when history is written in shadows.